Who are we talking about today, guys? Horn rim glasses, soul patch, beret, bent trumpet, pouch cheeks, the one and only Dizzy Gillespie. And Dizzy is, for my value dollar, whatever you want to say, the most underappreciated, undervalued artist in jazz in the eyes of today's jazz collector. And why that is, I don't know. I have a few ideas as to why that is. But Dizzy, he's truly one of the greats of this art form. And he exists very much in a transitional period. And you can't discover Miles, Charlie Parker, any of the modernity of jazz and not have Gillespie come up in that conversation. So why are people buying Gillespie's records? Why are Gillespie's records going for a fraction of what a lot of the other jazz greats records go for? It's a little puzzling to me. Gillespie has a real almost childish joy about him, and he had kind of this loose brevity that I think makes some fans take him less serious, which is crazy. You know, not everyone's got to be somber Miles and fucked up Charlie Parker. You know, he certainly has some of Armstrong's ebullience, joy, love of life, and that should be magnanimous. It should be just something we want to stick to ourselves and be like, yes, I need that energy in my life. And when it comes to virtuosity, there's no back seat in this dude's car. He's flying solo, and he's on par with the Freddie Hubbards and Clifford Browns. You know, in terms of straight virtuosity, ingenuity, improvisational skills, innovation, he's honestly, truly a top 5 all-time jazz musician. But he's not treated that way by today's jazz public. He's not well known besides the glasses and the soul patch, and you know, they know the picture of him, the guy, but they don't know the music, they don't know the player, they don't recognize his ability. And some of the blame here, I think, is clearly on the labels that he was on. There's no Blue Note. There's no Prestige. There's no Riverside. There's no Columbia. You know, so the collectability and value of Blue Notes and Riversides and Prestiges has made any artist on those labels elevated. And of course, we all know how Columbia will do that for pretty much any jazz artist. But Gillespie's career, especially in the early 60s, when a lot of the guys really started to establish LP sales as this new form of dominating the jazz marketplace, guys like Miles and Coltrane were selling really well. He was on the Philips label out of Europe, and I'm sure those records were available here domestically. I'm sure my copies are even domestic of those, but that's where he was at that time frame. And I know I passed over those Philips records for a long time just because I didn't really know the label. I thought maybe it was a budget associated with some kind of TV budget. I didn't know. You know, so I definitely passed those Philips records up. But he's such a giant. He's there with Parker making most of the innovations in this music, whether it's with Earl Hines or with Billy Eckstine's groups. They shrink those groups down into small groups and are just driving the innovation, playing the flatted fists. And Dizzy was also one of the great teachers. You didn't have Parker spending the time teaching you the music and the theory and how to be black in America and how not to get arrested. There's a lot of instruction that goes into life as a black male in this country. And Gillespie was a father figure to a lot of guys. And just a super important character in the development of the music, the art form, the improvisation. He really is such a huge figure. And it's somewhat puzzling how overlooked he is today. That tone. It's just gorgeous. We're listening to some Savoy recordings. This is Groovin' High. And some of the notes that Dizzy can hit are unrivaled. He did get into an accident on his bike where a car hit him, and he lost a couple top notes on his register, and he got into a loss. He sued the people, and he was only awarded $1,000 because he was a pretty well-paid musician at that time, so they kind of didn't take care of him. You gotta love Dizzy Gillespie. You know, he's born John Burke's Dizzy Gillespie. He's born in Chero, South Carolina, October 21st, 1917. He very early on heard Roy Eldridge, and Eldridge was a big influence and impact on young Dizzy. He grew up in a musical family. His dad taught music and had instruments around, so he had access to them. He was a great pianist. He learned to play trumpet and the trombone very fluently. He just, at a very early age, displayed an ability to be a great musician. And his dad seemed to have fostered that. In '39, he joins Cab Calloway's group. And Cab Calloway, of course, is one of the great swing groups. He's on the poppier side of things, trying to really do his shtick for the white audiences. The Minnie the Moocher and all that kind of stuff. He didn't care for, Cab didn't care for Gillespie's Chinese music, as it were, coloring outside the lines, as Dizzy often heard the need to do. As great musicians are, come on, Diz. Miles can't do that. Freddie Hubbard can do that. Clifford Brown can do that. Dizzy Gillespie can do that. It's pretty insane stuff. While in Cab Calloway's group, playing the Chinese music outside the lines that Cab was very disapproving of, there was an incident called the Spitball Incident, where in an already kind of tense situation, someone fired a spitball. Cab, who was already kind of weary of Dizzy, accused him. Dizzy wouldn't refuse to admit that it was him. And out of frustration, he eventually kind of stabs Gillespie in the leg and the thigh with some kind of a penknife or something. Nothing serious, but it was still enough for him to get fired from Dizzy's group. And he did manage to record in 1940 with Cab, one of his first recordings, a song called Pickin' the Cabbage. And any weed smoker can tell you picking the cabbage in today's lingo is the same as the picking the cabbage in the lingo in 1940. You just picking some herb, you know what I mean? That's the cabbage you're talking about. He didn't join the army. And this to me is, so gorgeous. This to me is one of the most telling things about Dizzy Gillespie. When he went to the recruiting office, this is the words he said. In this stage of my life, here in the United States of America, whose foot has been in my ass? He asked the guy that question. And he goes, so if you put me out there with a gun, there's no telling who I'm going to shoot. Friendly fire might accidentally happen. And he was so sincere with that delivery to his recruiters that they F4'd him. Unfit for service. Mentally unstable. He's not a guy we can trust with our backs. This guy ain't gonna have my 6. He might knife my 6. But that tells you something about Gillespie's cutting edge viewpoint of his place in the world. I'm not gonna be relegated, I'm not gonna be mistreated. I'm gonna aggressively handle my oppressor and tell him where I stand. And I think if Miles had been a little bit more outspoken and a little bit less withholding and resentful, he might have been a little bit more content, a little bit more able to breathe easy. Dizzy just said what was on his mind in such an honest, sincere way. And it worked. He did not deserve. I gotta remember that shit. And here's to the recruiters for being sensible enough to go, you know what? As a black male here in the United States of America in 1944 or 1941 probably, you're fucking right. I don't blame you. And if that's how you feel, go back to doing your music. It's a pretty telling tidbit and a wonderful anecdote. It's one of my favorite things I've come across researching and doing stuff for these bios. I don't get to do shepherd speak as much when I make a bio, because I'm telling you more of the story of a guy and I'm doing some research, and it's not like I'm just reciting stuff for my stream of thought consciousness. You know, this stuff's more a process and me trying to recant information in details, giving you some of the brushstrokes of this guy's life. Because remember, the brushstrokes is how we hear jazz. We need to know their environment, their experience within that environment, and their personality will dictate how they handle their experience within that environment. Those three brushstrokes will inform us greatly to what a guy's emoting and speaking through his instrument. It'll give us a lot of insight. You know, you show me 10 photographs of a man, and I'll tell you something about that man. That's just facts. And in a language that's spoken without words and is in a coded format, it's important to have a little insight into a guy's character, his patience, his temperament, and what was his experience. You know, sometimes the guys who come from the worst experiences have the most patience. Some guys who come from the best experience have the least patience, the most entitlement. Dizzy was just a character, you know, and his personality was so joyous and so infectious. He sadly doesn't have much tolerance for Parker's nonsense. You know, you weren't going to pawn my trumpet, Byrd. Sorry. You know, I'm over here on the chalkboard teaching these kids the scales of the flatted fists, and you over there trying to get one of them to loan you $40. Diz didn't have a lot of patience for that. They record together briefly, and they're so associated and affiliated with each other, you'd think that they did more, but they don't really. They play together quite a bit. Again, they first on the Earl Hines group, and the Hines group was pretty fantastic. And then they play together in the Billy Eckstine group again, which was also an incredible group. But he does take Byrd with him out west to play at a club in 40 out in LA, and the band's not received super well. They end up kind of disintegrating. If you watch Ken Burns' documentary, they talk about how Parker leaves the train at one point when they're stopping for fuel and water, and he's just a speck off in the distance, and Stan Levy has to go chase Byrd down. You know, Dizzy didn't have a lot of time for that. And so Dizzy does his own thing, creates kind of these big band ensembles, and brings bebop to the jazz world and to jazz musicians. He's the great disseminator of the knowledge, teaching it to all the kids. Parker's nodding off, Dizzy's giving you a lesson. He composed tracks like Groovin' High, Woody and You, Salt Peanuts, Night in Tunisia. In 44, he records Woody and You with Coleman Hawkins, as Dizzy being the lead side guy. It's kind of considered the first bebop recording. He also brings the Cuban Afro jazz sound into the American lexicon. He introduces Chano Pozo and Cebu Martinez to the world, and the Afro-Cuban percussion. Tracks like Manteca, Tintandeo, Cubano B, Cubano Ba. Dizzy's very integral in all that stuff happening. Salt Peanuts. In 46, he signs with Bluebird, which was being distributed by RCA, And that gave him a fairly big stage to work on. And he's also playing a lot with Norman Granz and the Jazz of the Philharmonic. And he does some recordings with Savoy, does some recordings with Teddy Reed at Roos label. But then he ends up recording a long stream of records for Norman Granz at Verve. And it's really outstanding stuff. And those records should be far more treasured than they are. The Roos stuff, the Savoy stuff, the Verve stuff, it should be highly held in esteem. But the stuff goes for very reasonable pricing. And you honestly can get one of jazz's greatest virtuosos for $25. You can pick up nice copies of some of his albums. It's really kind of disappointing in a way, although it's great for the collector with the low budget. You can get this guy's material for next to nothing. Nat Hentoff once described Dizzy's personality as one of great inner strength, incredible discipline, and he had a strong soul force. And I think that's all very evident, even in how he carries himself, with the soul patch, the horn rim glasses. He had a dignity. He was well dressed. He wasn't to be spoken down to. Let's kind of dive into some of his recordings. This is some more Savoy recordings, and this is 12020. This is 12047, and these are both going to be collections of 78 RPM era stuff. There's some of that Latin Cuban influence right there. Tintendeo. Chano Pozo was co-writer on some of these tracks as well. But these early Savoy tracks are worth finding, and they won't cost you huge money. I just realized I'm missing this is on Vernon Records, and this covers stuff from this era. I believe it's kind of reissues of Savoy stuff. I'm missing a record. I gotta find it. 1 second. I'm back. This is the one I'm missing, number 12110. More stuff from the 40s. This was somehow in the Jimmy Joffrey section next to Gillespie. It's funny, I did Astrid Gilberto yesterday, and it was right next to Dizzy. But I wasn't, that's not why I did Dizzy. I was thinking about Diz, and one of my Patreon members commented on some Gillespie stuff. And I'm like, you're not just thinking about doing an episode on Gillespie? And it kind of confirmed it for me. But again, this is 12110. I got this from a guy in LA. I remember there's some kind of distortion on some of this record that I was a little disappointed by. Swing Lone Sweet Chariot's great. Fantastic. This is a version of Alone Together with the orchestra of Johnny Richards. This is fantastic. Johnny Richards has a great album on Bethlehem. He's a pretty interesting arranger. He writes for a lot of big group ensembles. So Johnny Richards is the orchestra and the arrangings on this. And this version of Alone Together is just fucking amazing. It's beautiful. Why wasn't this more popular? This predates a lot of the Gil Evans, Miles Davis stuff, and yet no one knows about this. On the second side of this record, he plays with the Bebop Boys, and listen to this group. Milt Jackson, Hank Jones, Joe Harris on the drums, Dave Burns on the trumpet, James Moody on the tenor, Ray Brown on the bass, John Brown on the alto sax, with Dizzy Gillespie. Wow. Wow. Again, Joe Harris on drums, Ray Brown on the bass, Hank Jones on the piano, Milt Jackson on the vibes. Tenor, we got Moody, alto sax, John Brown, Dave Burns, and Dizzy Gillespie. That's an incredible band. Sounds right. This record sounds better than I remembered, actually. I remember it kind of on some of the bright sounds would kind of have a crackle. I remember telling the guy I bought it from, and he gave me a couple records in return that were well worth the exchange. But man, just fantastic stuff. So all three of these Savoy records should be seen as stuff by a giant that should be revered. And yet, Hank, it's pure fire. It's pure fire. This is a little box set, I think 2 or 3 LPs of some of the early stuff that they record. It's on the Roost label. It's got Night in Tunisia Part 1 and 2, Groovin' High Part 1 and 2, Clacto Vita Steam, Quasimodo, Bird Feathers, Air Conditioning, Swing Low Sweet Cadillac. A lot of fun stuff on there. In about 53, he's in Paris, and this great 10-inch comes out with a wonderful album cover. There's the soul patch, the horn, the beret, the glasses, the map of Paris in the background. This is on Roost number 414 in the 10-inch series, and there's only about 24 10 inches at Roost, and they're all really great stuff, actually. But this is a really cool find. I really enjoy this part of my collection, and it's not the best sounding version of this record, but it sounds pretty darn good, to be honest. And the Parisians loved it.
Easy.
The Parisians totally got this. And you know, it's a low fidelity recording without question. But it's still a great documentation of one of the giants of this music. He has 2 more 12 inches on Roost. And this is a reissuing of this in Paris on 12 inch. And then this is Diz and Byrd together. I think some of the stuff is also on that box set. Yeah, it's some of that same stuff in that box. So that box set's probably this stuff culled together. That. So that's in the Roost period. And then one of the least seen Gillespie records, and I can't tell you much about it. Dizzy. Tell him, brother. Just a fluent viscosity to this guy's playing. This record on Atlantic sounds fantastic. And you don't think of Dizzy being on Atlantic much. It's number 1257, so it puts it probably 56, 57. And it says Dizzy at home and abroad. So I think some of this is studio, and some of this might be live. Quite a large different personality. It's definitely from different sessions. Great stuff. It's kind of a tough one to come by, but I see it for decent prices when I see it. Never more than $30 for a great early Atlantic black label Dizzy Gillespie record. That's a steal. So that's going to lead us. First of all, Blue Note. I said he wasn't on Blue Note, and he really wasn't. This was recorded in France for the Vogue label, and Alfred Lion reached a deal with the Vogue label in the early 50s to issue some of the Vogue titles that were coming out in Europe on LP here in America. And it leads to Dizzy being on Blue Note, although he never recorded at the Blue Note studios under Alfred. It's kind of a tough one to come by, the Horn of Plenty. Again, that wonderful sound, that tone, it's so centered. And even when he plays those flatted fifths at times, he knows exactly where he's bending it to. And he's just one of the great artists of this music. And there's just no debating it. And again, he should be cherished so much more than he is by today's jazz collector. So that's going to lead us to his time at Norman Granz's Verve. And he's at Verve for a long stretch here. From probably mid 55, 56, he's a driving force for Norman Granz's label. And it means he's also playing with some of the older guard on his sessions. So he's not cutting records with the kids quite the same way a lot of his contemporaries were. And I think that hurts him some as well. If he had been at Blue Note or a place like that where he was recording with all those fiery kids, it would have had an impact. This is number 8166. It's a fine record. It's kind of a jazz jam session with Gillespie, Sonny Stitt, John Lewis, Skeeter Best, Percy Heath, and Charlie Person. And the Verve was doing a lot of stuff like this at that point. But here we go, 8208. And this is the Manteca record. And of course this has a 10-inch release as well. Sonny Stitt, another guy on Underappreciated. Something I should do, the all underappreciated jazz group. You already got Sonny Stitt and Dizzy Gillespie. Here's the Great Night in Tunisia that every jazz cat from this point forward has to try to knock out. And of course, you can play it like Dizzy does. This is the 8208, so this 12-inch version probably comes out in 55, maybe 56. Verve gets to the 12 inches kind of before Verve and Riverside do. He's got a lot of Cubans on this record. Caravans on here. It's really an outstanding session. I see J.J. Johnson's name, yep. Ernie Royal, Quincy Jones shows up on that. Great stuff. This is a Sunny Side Up record that's with Sonny Stitt again and a young Sonny Rollins. And we don't think of Rollins being a Verve guy, and he wasn't very long, but he does show up there in places. This is one of the first Gillespie jazz records I had. One of the first jazz records I ever had. It's number 307 in my collection. And this is one of those records I found at my ex-girlfriend's grandma's yard sale. Along with those couple Coltrane records I've talked about before, I found this in her garage. And I was like, I knew just enough about jazz to know that Dizzy was someone I should know more about. I probably haven't taken this out of its case in years. 8313. It's getting us into late 50s, maybe early, maybe 60. Junior Mance Les Spann on the flute and the guitar, the great Sam Jones on the bass, and Lex Humphries on the drums. So it's a pretty serious group. And Junior Mance was at Verve at this point. He has a great solo record there on Verve that's really worth seeking out. People collect all that early Miles stuff on Prestige in the early 50s. And Dizzy's doing serious work with a higher level of maturity, and no one cares. You know, it's shocking to me the power of marketing. He's also a great scat singer. That doesn't sound like him though. That sounds like I don't know who it is. I suppose it could be him, but I don't think it is. Al Gray's on this, wow. Lee Morgan's on this. Melba Liston, Al Gray, Ernie Henry, Jimmy Powell, Billy Mitchell, Benny Golson, Billy Root, Wynton Kelly, Charlie Purcell. Damn. That's a pretty serious lineup. This is one of his bigger band records. And that record's insane. And one of the things I discovered doing my Jazz Bio series is that all the greats do play with Dizzy for a stretch. And a lot of Dizzy's big bands in the late 40s, early 50s, even in the late 50s, he's giving chairs to a lot of great up-and-coming talent that he's heard. And it's not like Miles, who's cherry-picking guys that are already making records and are being renowned in the industry. Dizzy's educating and bringing to the fore kids from the fields and the streets and from schools. And like Blakey, he's one of the true fountains of jazz education and really spreads the message. But again, trumpets, Dizzy Gillespie, Lee Morgan, Herbert Perry, Carl Warwick, Atali Dawood. Trombones, Al Gray, Rod Levitt, and Melba Liston. The saxes, Ernie Henry, Jimmy Powell, Billy Mitchell, Benny Golson, and Billy Root. Piano, Wynton Kelly, Paul West on the bass, and Charlie Purcell on the drums. That's an insane group. And I'm reading that for the first time. I've played this record numerous times, but I don't think I've ever let that soak in. The ebullient Mr. Gillespie, which is a word I've often described him as. This is a smaller group here. Junior Mance, Les Spann, Sam Jones, Lex Humphries, and Chano Pozzo's on the conga on that one. And I think I also got this one from my ex's grandma. Great stuff. Had that in my collection for a long time. The Greatest Trumpet of Them All, featuring Benny Golson. This is the Dizzy Gillespie Octet. So again, it's a pretty big group. These records deserve a much greater listening. You know, they deserve a bigger audience. He's fusing bebop, swing era, modernity, all into one new driving sound. And the virtuosity of these groups is second to none. This is a quartet with Charlie Purcell, George Duvivier, and Hank Jones. A portrait of Duke Ellington. And no one cares. No one buys these records. No one cares about a record with Hank Jones, Charlie Purcell, Dizzy Gillespie, and George Duvivier. Records like this you can find for $15-20. And they're great. They're really... I'm sometimes without words as some of today's modern shoppers, but it's so driven by consumerism and the big marketing of the big labels. And I've said that 1,000 times, you know, Miles' success is linked to that Columbia record label. This is an electrifying evening with Dizzy Gillespie's quintet with Lalo Schifrin, Leo Wright, Chuck Lampkin, and Bob Cunningham, recorded live in concert. 8401, probably puts it about 1962, February 61. It's an old promo copy. I don't think it's white label, but it might be. Let's take a look. No, it's black. But it's for promo use only with a black label. Just about pristine condition, this record. I don't listen to some of these Gillespie records enough either. This is 8411, Perceptions, Dizzy Gillespie trumpet soloist, plus 21, conducted by Gunther Schuller. Composed and arranged by J.J. Johnson. And that's going to get us to the few Philips records I have. This is Dizzy Gillespie and the Double Six of Paris. This one here is the New Wave, Dizzy Gillespie, No More Blues, also on the Philips label. And there's probably at least 3 or 4 more Philips records that I've passed over and not bought over the years. And now that I am buying them, I don't live close enough to a record store to grab them when I see them. And I'm not buying any records right now until I get my employment situation figured out. This is Swing Low, Sweet Cadillac. He goes back and revisits that song on the Impulse label, number 149, which puts us probably 1966 or so. Mike Longo, James Moody, Candy Finch, and Frank Schifano. I think this is his only record at Impulse. And again, if he had made a few more at Impulse, I think his legacy would be greater with today's collectors. But it's on Old Verve, pre-Creed Taylor. It's on Philips, a European label. It's late in the Impulse. It's on Roost and Savoy, that labels that only kind of really deep jazz collectors are knowledgeable about. He's got an obscure Atlantic record that for some reason no one ever speaks about. All my years in my Facebook jazz groups, I'm not sure if I've ever seen that Atlantic Dizzy Gillespie record posted. I posted it once or twice, and most people are like, oh, I've never seen that. So why is he so anonymous in spite of being so famous? You know, he's definitely a huge name. The name Dizzy Gillespie, even a lot of jazz, non-jazz fans have heard of Dizzy and recognize the glasses and the hat and the soul patch. So why is his music not more collected by today's collectors? I just have theories. I don't have any solid information. I'd like to know why. I think it's somewhat of a miscarriage of justice. He should be remembered far more nobly, and his record should fetch more collector prices. But it's great for us who don't want to spend big bucks on a record, I guess. So Gillespie, as far as bang for your buck, not sure there's a better value anywhere in the jazz world than the great Dizzy Gillespie. That's just my theory. He's one of the less tragic figures in jazz. He had a fairly long life. He records and plays, I think, into 91, 92, when he finally falls ill and we lose him. But his impact is indelible. His influence on countless players of his generation and the generations after is unrivaled. His recorded legacy is very noble and deserves more recognition. Like I said, one of the great teachers of this music, one of the great personalities of this music, one of the great ambassadors of jazz to the world. And I think he's appreciated more in Europe than he is here. And again, it all kind of boils down to jazz in general is very underappreciated here in America. And it's a bit like the ancient Egyptians finding value in the words of Moses. Oh, that kid in the bushes, in the basket, you know what I mean? They escaped from the Pharaoh's rule. They were slaves, and now they're writing songs about freedom. What's that say about us if we start listening to that? How does that look back on our history if we recognize their history too strongly and succinctly? And so I think a lot of Americans take that approach almost like, we don't want to validate that claim that they make, that they were really oppressed. At best, we'd like to forget about it. And at worst, there's people who think slavery was a privilege and that we fed them and housed them and they wouldn't have been smart enough to do that on their own. And there's a great notion out there in white America that the white lifestyle of living is under attack. And it's probably the greatest lie I've ever heard. It's so silly, it's such a crazy notion for these people to think that there's an eradication coming of the great white way. And oddly enough, it's your small-mindedness that's going to drive your sons and daughters into the arms of immigrants and minorities, and we're going to breed our way out of this mess eventually. But fool's gold, man. These people are don't have words for it sometimes. Jazz, great, proud heritage. We all should love it and embrace it. Spread the word, teach the faith, let people know. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. My name is Dan. Please check out my Patreon page. Thank you to everyone who's donated. It means a lot to me. We're making progress. You know, if I can triple where I'm at by the end of the month, I'll probably be okay. I'll probably not have to get a 9 to 5, but I'll probably still be able to make great jazz content for you almost every day. And that's what I want to do. I love talking about this music. I love sharing with you guys. I love the sense of community that it's given me. The dialogue and exchange, it's invaluable. You know, and I know that some people have gone back to work and my viewership's gone down some. The time watched has gone down some. And just people's schedules have picked up. I understand that. But there's still a lot of people watching every day, and you guys are awesome. And even those who only have time to watch once in a while, thank you for finding the time. You know, and I'll try to keep the content as relevant as I can and as poignant and as powerful as I can, and talk about the guys that need to be talked about. And I'll continue putting the work in. So everybody, thank you so much. From the bottom of my heart, I love you guys, man. It's been a great communion, and fellowship's very important. It's important to speak with people with like minds and to reinforce your beliefs and values, and to find that validation means the world. So again, appreciate you all. Be safe. Have a great day. We're in the middle of about a 30-day stretch of weather around 90 degrees here, so it's been hot. And this morning's actually one of the coolest mornings I've had. Normally I'm dripping in sweat by now. The humidity must be a little lower today, thankfully. Anyway, my new Gillespie shirt, I dig it, love it. Y'all be safe, be blessed, peace.